Y'all getting any cold weather, Denise?
It is freezing here.
It is
It's
13 degrees where I'm at, and we've got a wind chill of 4 below.
not looking forward to this at all.
Oh, what is the temperature there?
It was 37 this morning.
Oh my, that's cold. Denise, do you have the PowerPoint and will you be advancing it or would you like for me to share screen?
I'll let you share screen. That way there's not an issue with it.
Okay.
I'm excited about this. Thank you for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for asking. I hope that folks find it helpful in some way. Um,
They will.
yeah, I haven't really, full disclosure, researched where Florida's at in terms of transition away from sheltered. So
Don't do it.
do what? Don't research it?
Mm-mm. Well, we have legislation to move away from sheltered workshop to full competitive employment, and we've been. I think this is year three of them writing the policies and the techniques for how they can do that.
Okay. Well,
Let's get this party started. Welcome, everyone. We are here. I just saw I heard people. Okay. We are here to hear from Sandra Block, who is from Indiana University, and she is going to be speaking on transition away from sheltered employment, what we know, and what we can do. And let you know just a little bit about Sandra real quick. Sandra Block is a research assistant at Indiana's Institute on Disability and Careers. Block holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Indiana University and a master's in education from Indiana University. She provides technical assistance to special education teachers and school districts in Indiana, instruction in discovery best practices, customized employment, job development, and offers subject matter expertise in employment services as well as a plethora of other disability related topics. She has worked in both Kentucky and Indiana, and she is the co author of Strengthening the Role of the Employee, an analysis of supported employment using social role valorization theory, and that was published in the Journal of Vocational Rehabilitation. She is also an APSE member, which stands for the Association for Professional Supported Employment First, and is on the Indiana APSE Policy Committee. I will stop sharing, and now you can start sharing, Sandra. Thank you.
all right. Thanks, Denise. Hello, everybody. Those bios are just so uncomfortable for some reason to read. It's like, really? Is that me? I don't know. But it's good to be here. I understand it's cold in Florida, so I feel your pain. We have 13 degrees where I'm at right now, and the wind chill is about 4 below. So I cannot wait for summer to start showing its face here in a little bit. Let me see if I can advance this slide. My mouse, there you are, has decided to quit working occasionally. So thanks for inviting me. We're going to talk about the transition from sheltered employment to competitive integrated employment here in Indiana. And I hope that much of the information will be useful and usable to folks in Florida. If you have questions along the way, you can feel free to take yourself off mute and ask me or put your question in chat, and Denise can monitor that. I'll try to be going at a pretty good clip today, though, so fair warning. Um, this presentation compiles findings from recent work that we did at the Center on Community Living and Careers, and it is an ongoing project. We have many products developed as a result of the project, and we have begun to share outcomes, all of which you can see after this webinar on our website. So when you find a Friday night where you're not doing anything and it's cold outside, you can curl up on your recliner with an adult beverage and just sort of dive into what we've discovered and the resources that we've put together relative to this project. It was funded in 2023 by the Division of Disability and Rehabilitative Services in Indiana. And our task was to gather information regarding needs and best practices in supporting adults with disabilities and their families to transition from sheltered work to competitive integrated employment, which I'm going to call CIE from this point forward. We also investigated family and service provider experiences when transitioning away from sheltered to competitive employment. And then we created products for all of the stakeholders, research and best practices in transition, and a lessons learned sort of compendium that applied to transition from segregated service settings. So just in short, lots and lots and lots of information that coincidentally mirrors and bolsters additional research from places like the Institute for Community Inclusion or Mathematica or any number of other research efforts designed to look at that transition. And all of that research occurred within the context of a combined and current legislative landscape clearly skewed towards elimination of 14C or sub-minimum wage environments. Now you see the graphic on slide 4. It has 6 primary legislative actions. I'll just use the word action. The Department of Labor, in fact, announced in December 2024 a proposed rule change to phase out 14C certificates. And they also proposed to discontinue the issuance of new certificates and to establish that 3-year phase out period for employers with existing certificates. And that rule, you can follow that rule becoming effective when you check out that link. Denise, do you have the document that I put together? It's handouts for Florida.
Yes. Which link?
Can you put the links from slide 4? Link to that announcement is here. Proposed rule.
Okay. I'll look for it and put it in there.
That's great. And if you can't find it, I'll forward all of these slide links to Denise right after the session. And so change is afoot in Indiana and across the nation. And those changes are reflective of, like I said, recent legislation happening that supports person-centered practices and preferred employment outcomes. Now, we're going to touch briefly on the point in history that we find ourselves in, because it's important you understand that point in history. And keeping that in mind, whether or not you recognize it, significant events are shaping history right now. And we are right in the middle of it. 20 years from now, 15 years from now, we're going to look back and go, oh, yeah, that was the tipping point, and we were right there. So I want to just highlight some of the legislative environment that we find ourselves in, starting at the top with the Workforce Integration and Opportunity Act. Now, that was signed into law in 2014. And it is designed to, and I'm going to quote here, help job seekers access employment, education, training, and support services to succeed in the labor market and to match employers with the skilled workers they need to compete in a global economy. Now, the timing of the last WIOA amendment roughly coincides with increased scrutiny around the use of 14C certificates used to legalize subminimum wage practices. The collective emphasis in the US is on securing and facilitating CIE. Now, to the right, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act mandates a summary of performance for all special education students, and it requires the use of transition services to facilitate post-secondary outcomes for independent living, employment, and education and training. Now, that's important to remember in the context and embedded within all 6 of these pieces of legislation. Now, one that people seem to be less familiar with, if we keep moving to the right, is the Transformation to Competitive Employment Act. And this is a push to ban subminimum wage or 14C employment for people with disabilities, and it's gained momentum in recent years. At least 13, actually, I think it's 15 as of this morning, states have banned 14C, and several more are considering it. Indiana, for example, plans to phase out sheltered employment as a waiver-funded service by 2027. Now, if this Transformation to Competitive Employment Act is passed, the law would phase out similarly subminimum wage exemptions and instead provide grants and other resources to shift sheltered workshop employees to jobs in the community. The first U.S. state to close sheltered workshops and end subminimum wage was Vermont, but Vermont will not be the last one. Now, if you continue on to the right in this graphic, you're going to be looking at the 2018 National Council on Disability report, and that provided impetus for the creation of the Transformation to Competitive Employment Act. This NCD report is important because it notes that opponents of eliminating the use of 14C, and I quote, frequently argue that 14C employers would not be able to employ people with disabilities that they do at minimum wages or above without going out of business. That's a pretty hefty statement. Now, this NCD response that many of the larger disability service providers operating sheltered workshops can afford to pay minimum wages, but they don't. And this report also notes that students with disabilities today are far less willing than previous generations to work in segregated sheltered workshops. And that's important because it signifies the start to a gradual closing of that decades past special school to sheltered workshop pipeline. And I also want to share another quote from that NCD report. And here it is. The writing for sheltered workshops and for their rebranded incarnations around the world appears to be at least stenciled on the wall from an economic, social, and human rights perspective. Oh, that's a pretty brave statement, isn't it? Um, so now if we continue around this circle, we're at the U.S. Civil Rights Commission report from 2020. This report came on the heels of the NCD report, and it looked at subminimum wages as related to the civil rights of people with disabilities. And the primary recommendation from that 2020 report was that Congress should repeal Section 14C with a planned phase out. The last piece of legislation came in 2023, and it was from the Government Accountability Office. Now, this report was issued after examining 14C wage certificate holders. And pieces of important information were highlighted in this Government Accountability Office report. They highlighted a decline in the number of employers using 14C, that most 14C workers earned less than $3.50 per hour, that community rehabilitation agencies represented the vast majority of 14C certificate holders, and that the Department of Labor does not sufficiently oversee 14C programs. And so now, like I said, in Indiana, as with many other states across the nation, we are seeing this concerted effort towards CIE. Some agencies are changing their business model to facilitate that change. Now, the research that we did included a qualitative narrative review using hundreds of peer-reviewed articles, state reports, national reports, and specific to the barriers and facilitators of transition from sheltered to competitive. In other words, we wanted to know what's helpful when you're making this transition, what gets in the way when you're making this transition for agencies, for families, and for the individual with a disability. The research also included face-to-face interviews with agency staff supporting people during the transition to CIE, with individuals who have either already transitioned to CIE or were in the process, and interviews with their family members. There were often times where the family unit was interviewed together for many different reasons. And we have key findings from that collective research specific to the barriers present during transition. We identified 9 primary barriers for families and people with disabilities attending 14C programs who wanted to work in the community, and some of the barriers also being experienced by agencies themselves relative to that transition. And the 9 barriers that we identified, you see them here on the slide. Knowledge gaps, attitudinal related barriers, training and support related barriers, financial considerations. You all can imagine that's primarily about Social Security benefit misconception as much as it is about having sufficient information. And then you had a plethora of emotional and psychological barriers that families and their loved ones expressed relative to that transition. Of course, safety concerns was an identified barrier. Transportation, Wow, that's not a shocker, is it? Oh my gravy. If we had a magic wand, transportation would be one of the first things I think that we would get figured out for the universe. Limited availability and access to competitive opportunities was a consistent barrier. And then, of course, you've got systemic and policy related barriers, which may be a little bit of what Florida is tackling with right now, because you all are in the planning stages, right? And so this PowerPoint is organized by topical barrier. So you're going to see an identified barrier followed by strategies. And it's important for you to know that the strategies we recommend originate from the research. They are informed by the research. So the strategies that you see after any identified barrier, think of that strategy as something that you can do to facilitate CIE. And then finally, each barrier identified is going to have not only strategies, but then recommended resources that an agency might consider using in order to eliminate or mitigate that specific barrier. So it goes barrier, strategy, resources, barrier, strategy, resources. And I feel like that will keep it organized for you in a fairly decent way. So let's look at the first barrier that we've identified, and that is knowledge gap. So what do we mean by knowledge gap, right? The research was pretty clear regarding the presence of insufficient awareness or knowledge among people with disabilities transitioning away from sheltered, their family members, 14C staff, and employers. So individuals with disabilities and their families they come up against pretty significant informational barriers regarding CIE. And community rehab staff often lack the necessary knowledge to assist in getting families and individuals the right information. The lack of information regarding key aspects of CIE, like the impact of earned income, the option of customized employment, or the use of person-centered tools for service delivery, all of those things contribute to a general reluctance towards CIE. So if you're scratching your head wondering what's keeping this family from embracing transitioning away from sheltered, um, the knowledge gap often is the research. I mean, is the reason, holy cow, can I speak? The 13-degree weather is going to my brain. Um, so the research pointed consistently, repeatedly, across the decades to that knowledge gap being a problem. And there was a notable gap in technical expertise required from staff for successful provision of CIE. In other words, we've got to remember that 14C staff are generally now not equipped with the skills necessary for best practice service provision relative to CIE. And so staff often do not have opportunities for that kind of skill development and skill enhancement, or maybe ongoing professional development, especially regarding customized employment or job development. And then when you have those skill gaps, those can be compounded, made even more challenging when you've got any sort of exclusionary mindset or ability to envision what CIE might look like for any given person. So the barriers in terms of knowledge gaps are really complex. And then we haven't even talked about the challenge of limited employer awareness and knowledge about disability topics, despite all of the targeted attempts to remedy those gaps that we all engage on weekly, sometimes daily. I mean, the research consistently highlighted a lack of inclusive hiring practice, lack of information about accommodations, the presence of negative stereotypical attitudes, and how all of that sways employer receptiveness to disability hiring. You see on slide 12 some of the strategies that you can use to mitigate knowledge gaps. You can coordinate collective provider efforts. This is important because family perspectives about CIE influence other family perspectives about CIE, where a family may not trust service providers or the system, they will trust information that they hear from one another. And so if one family has the wrong information or misinformation, we see this a lot of times, especially around the impact of earned income on a benefit check. If one family has the wrong information, and share that with another family, before too long, you have a train of misinformation that is impacting a family's reluctance to stay away from CIE and to stay with what feels comfortable and familiar, which is sheltered employment. So that goes to number two, information dissemination. Getting the right information disseminated to all of your key stakeholders is a strategy to mitigate knowledge gaps. Providing knowledge and professional development to 14C staff just has to be done. It has to be a built-in part of conversion. And then to promote inclusive employer practices and educate employers regarding accommodations. Those are all strategies. And on slide 13, you've got just a few highlighted resources, just a few. There's only 4 on here. But the resources that Denise will provide will link you to the larger body of this research, and it's all available on our website. The documents, you can download all of them, share them widely. All of the strategies can be downloaded. So again, when you've got, a Friday where you're not doing anything and it's snowing and you have, your coffee or whatever, these would be great documents to become more familiar with and to share out. So another barrier, as you can imagine, is the adverse impact of negative attitudes and bias, just in general, around the integration of people with disabilities into CIE. Now, a lot of these attitudes, you guys know this, I'm talking to the choir. They're a result of implicit bias or, something that we learn to associate with something else. And when you combine that with, the historical marginalization of people with disabilities, um, and the ableist mindsets that exist, especially among employers, you can really begin to see how this will impact any conversion from sheltered to CIE. I mean, we've had legislative efforts like the Rehab Act, WIOA, the ADA, sections 501 and 503 of that Rehab Act. And we still are dealing with ongoing implicit bias. And we're going to keep dealing with it because we're all human, right? And so, You do what you can, when you can, where you can, and how you can to counteract or offset that bias. It's very complex. Um, Now, this issue of bias is going to intensify when a person with a disability might also happen to hold an intersecting identity. And by that, I mean, depending on your community, if you're disabled and poor, if you're disabled and Black, by intersecting, we mean that you hold more than one identity that elicits bias from other people. Employers often, you guys know this too, falsely believe that people with disabilities can't perform essential job functions, which is hogwash. We all know that. And those fears about hiring a person with a disability that will result in demands on other employees and in general decrease productivity across any given work team um, really just compound the problem. Um, Now, what we found in the research that we hadn't really considered was that people with disabilities and their family members can and do start to internalize all of those negative attitudes and stereotypes to the point, and this is really sad, to the point that they themselves no longer believe that they're able to have success with CIE. So they doubt their own capacity. And then we dug a little bit deeper in the research and we discovered that sheltered employment attendees think of themselves, not everyone, of course, this is not a blanket statement. It occurs often enough that it appears persistently in the research, though, that people attending 14C can begin to perceive themselves as burdens, especially to their family, and that perception can decrease their willingness to consider CIE. And that's because someone attending a sheltered workshop may perceive that transition to CIE will place extra demands, especially regarding transportation and daily schedules, on their family members. And so you've got folks attending sheltered programs that are worried about being burdensome and doubt their own ability to be successful. And then you've got family members who also have this perception that CIE is likely not going to be successful because they're skeptical. Their skepticism about job support services being what they need to be for their loved one. They're skeptical about employers providing accommodations. They're skeptical about their loved one being safe or being able to effectively communicate in the community. Um, and there's a general distrust of the system that's coming from families. The research also indicated that skepticism, it's not just reserved to families and individuals with disabilities. It comes from staff too, pretty consistently. And so the entrenched attitudes and biases are pretty long ranging. They're pretty long ranging. Some of the strategies you see here on slide 15, these will be common sense to you. And so I'm not going to read through every single one of them. Like I said, Denise will share a link, and Denise, I'm going to share the handout again with you so that you can send it to all of the attendees. And on that list, you'll find a link that has all of the strategies compiled in one place. and all of the resources compiled in one place. These would be great documents for agency leadership to grab and study, take to your staff, take to your families, take to your boards of directors, take to your state leadership, right? So I'm not going to read through this slide. These are a few, just 3 of the strategies that you can use to offset unhelpful attitudes. Some from Georgetown, National Center for Cultural Competence, and we have several on our website. So another barrier that we identified was access to quality training and support services. And this really has to do with what 14C staff are asked to do in terms of providing employment services. Successful, supported, and competitive, customized employment, they all require different skill sets. They can require specialized training such that you get about systematic instruction, fundamental training methods, task analysis, instructional plans, workplace assessment, how to facilitate natural supports. All of these things require some level of professional development and skill enhancement. And that's part of what we mean by access to quality training and support services. Some of the strategies that you can use, and I'm kind of going a little bit quicker because I'm looking at my time. Some of the strategies that you can use to offset or mitigate this barrier, quality training and support services, is what you see here on slide 18. Promote assistive technology. Emphasize personalized assistance. That means person-centered job support planning. Person-centered. Use specialized training opportunities. Increase exposure to a variety of career choices for the individuals that you are working with. That might include comprehensive career counseling. These are but a few of the resources that are available to you that will help you mitigate the barrier of quality, I know I'm hopping, access to quality training and support. These are but a few. This pilot provider transformation webinar, and all of these resources, by the way, are free, FREE, they are free. They're out there. They've existed. They continue to exist. There's no good reason why staff cannot, apart from time, right? We all can use more time. Take advantage of some of these resources. The Job Accommodation Network is especially helpful, and they have a live chat line, which is really kind of cool. Another barrier is the impact of earned income on a beneficiary's checks. And I know that in Florida, employment specialists are introduced to, I'll call it foundational benefits information. It can be more robust, in my opinion, but that's just my opinion. We all have one, right? But really being able to facilitate and push out the correct information about federal and state benefits is going to make the difference between a person's willingness to consider CIE or not. Some people, when Florida finally converts, some people may decide, in fact, not to work because they have the wrong misinformation. They have the wrong information. They may decide not to work, period. And so in that case, now you're faced with, well, how do we help this person build a series of meaningful days within a week, within a month? right? How do we help them have a quality of life that's holistic and looks at all of the life domains? Should they decide, nope, CIE, I'm not doing it, right? So benefits, financial considerations. Here are some strategies that you can use to offset the lack of knowledge about benefits. Address the misinformation. Be ethical about it. Provide certification for benefits counselors. Understand work incentives, like impairment-related work incentives, like a PASS plan, like self-employment income, net earnings from self-employment, NESE. I love the way Social Security uses these acronyms that are so confusing. Provide comprehensive benefits counseling, right? And just in general, alleviate the fear through education. Many agencies in Indiana are doing this through town halls. So the agency will have a town hall night, and it'll be all about benefits and earned income and government. Um, uh, oh, what's the word? It's not coming to mind in the brain Rolodex. Government benefits. And so they'll have a town hall, have coffee, have water, and they will sit and talk about it and provide that information. And there's no good reason why agencies that are in the same geographic area couldn't maybe sponsor that together. That'd be pretty cool. So you see here just a few resources. These are but a few. And apart from the benefits information training, which is at a cost, all of these are free, which is pretty cool. And then you've got emotional and psychological barriers that might be preventing people from shifting to integrated employment. This can be anxiety, a generalized reluctance, fear, sadness about losing friendships that have been established at the sheltered workshop, fear of physical safety in the community, emotional safety in the community. Like parents are often afraid that their adult son or daughter are going to be ridiculed and mistreated. I'm sure you guys hear that over and over and over. Um, Fear of medication management not being managed, so you're concerned about physical health. Um, there's even anger due to perceived abandonment. My staff is making me do this conversion thing. I don't want to do it. They're just abandoning me, right? So you've even got anger involved in the general emotional and psychological barriers. Not to mention that people often feel like there's a lack of control. These are some of the strategies that you can use to help mitigate emotional and psychological barriers. Talk about the benefits of CIE. We all know what they are. They're the same benefits that each of us glean from work. Emphasize the value of inclusivity. Highlight not only the economic benefit of being employed, but the psychological well-being that results from holding a valued role in your community. Emphasize that CIE comes in lots of shapes and sizes. It doesn't have to be full-time. It can be part-time. It can be 4 hours a day. My brother, who lives with my husband and I, has significant multiple impacts of disability. He has a complex body, um, complex seizures, complex cognition, and he works a part-time job. Is it 20 hours a week? Nope. So the point is, it doesn't have to be, right? This is why you develop a person-centered approach to CIE. But lots of families, I'm telling you, you guys know this too. They think, oh my gosh, they're talking about 40 hours a week. Oh my gosh, they're talking about 30 hours a week. No, no, we're talking about person-centered job planning. Where did my mouse go? These are some of the resources that are free for you to use. This is only four on a much larger uh, resource that contains all, only all resources, all resources. Safety concerns. We hear this all the time. Parents are worried about physical harm in the workplace. They're worried about emotional harm in the workplace. They're worried about their son or daughter not being able to communicate effectively in the workplace. They're worried about service providers not abandoning their loved one in a workplace. They're worried about workplace injury. Interestingly enough, the research points out that just as many workplace injuries occur in a sheltered environment as they do in a CIE environment. I found that interesting. You see here some of the strategies that you can use to mitigate or eliminate safety concerns. I don't think you're ever really going to eliminate all the safety concerns. I know that as a parent, even though all my children are grown, I will always worry. And boy, if somebody cleaned that worry slate free and it was all empty, I bet within an hour I could come up with a new worry as a parent. It's just your default position, right? And so I don't think that we will ever really wipe those concerns all the way clear. But there are certainly things that we can do to mitigate those safety concerns, and they are primarily related to planning, having a support plan, having a communication plan, trying to anticipate and mitigate as much as you possibly can before a person even starts day one at work. Also, safety concerns can be mitigated. I'm going to say this two-letter phrase again, by engaging in person-centered planning, because person-centered planning is organic to the person. And if you're planning organically, you're already taking into account safety concerns, if that makes sense. Lots and lots of strategies. Some agencies are using peer-to-peer mentorship programs, and they're developing family-to-family mentorship programs as a way to mitigate safety concerns. Another thing that you can think about doing is we all know that storytelling is an effective teaching mechanism. It just is. And so sharing success stories with your larger group of families and individuals can be really, really effective. Here's some recommended resources that you can use to mitigate safety concerns. And then transportation. Oh boy, there is just no, you guys know this. Again, I'm talking to the choir. Why did that skip? I don't know, but it did. Bear with me a minute. Sorry. So the transportation is just a mess. Lots of people that we support for CIE aren't going to be able to get a driver's license, don't want to get a driver's license, don't have the financial means to get a vehicle. We all know how ridiculously expensive vehicles are nowadays. Even used vehicles, for heaven's sakes. Having the knowledge and support around how to use a pass plan to purchase a vehicle is something that's often not done by professionals. Thinking about using natural supports in the workplace to facilitate reliable transportation isn't happening enough as it could. And then reliance on specialized transportation, holy cow, right? That's a huge problem. And then we've got that barrier compounded when you work non-traditional work hours, or when you've got to consider family schedules and disruptions to those schedules. It is such a complex problem. Here we have listed some strategies that you can think about to minimize or ease or alleviate somewhat the transportation issues. Honestly, I think transportation issues are a statewide conversation. I think they are a county conversation. They are a leadership conversation. Perhaps it will involve revisions to a Medicaid waiver. For example, does Florida have a consumer directed waiver portion? And how is a consumer able to direct their transportation budget to get their transportation needs met? So I think transportation is a state by state problem to figure out. But nonetheless, we have some recommendations, some resources, and these are but four of the resources that we have put together that can help you alleviate the transportation issue. And then availability and access to competitive opportunities. This one really is about our agencies. Is the agency that you have selected as your agency of choice able to provide you with effective best practice employment services? What can vocational rehabilitation do? What should it look like? What can person-centered planning do? What should it look like? Just agencies being able to fully develop a plan for even workplace accommodations or assistive technology. A lot of staff, this is from the research report, believing that people have to first be trained. And this was the sheltered workshop readiness mindset, right? Train and then place. And we're talking about a complete paradigm shift. Place and then train. That's how I learned my job. But finding the right agency that has that mindset, that has the available skills, that has access to the right staff to provide those skills, and any staff can be the right staff. I truly believe that. And so some of the strategies, we mentioned the first one already. Paying attention to transition strategies for students that are exiting school. Talking about VR challenges, right? What can we do to more effectively interface with VR? As well as pinpointing funding issues when you're talking about transition. Like I said, many agencies in Indiana have changed their business model. They've been very creative. These are but a few of the resources. 1, 2, 3, 6. No, 5. I can't count today. 5 resources, and there's a much, much larger list of resources. So the Lead Center has years and years and years worth of technical assistance and webinars that are free. They're absolutely free. Transcend has some documents around person-centered planning. You can find those pretty easily if you look hard enough. Life Course has a lot of information around person-centered planning, and Mark Golden Associates is always a great website to look at. This is led by Michael Callahan, who was with the United Cerebral Palsy League in the 80s, and they were the first to get a demonstration grant to try out this thing called customized employment. It's pretty cool. it's always a great resource to have. And then your systemic and policy related barriers. We're really talking about state systems, sometimes agency systems, and how they interact or don't with one another to create unequal access and a reluctance towards CIE. There's a list of 10 top strategies that you can use, engage in widely, to begin to harmonize systems and policies. And here are but a few resources. This one at the bottom, Provider Transformation Series, might be particularly helpful for Florida. And I only say that because I understand that Florida is in the planning stage for transformation. And that's it. Let me stop sharing. In March, I'm going to have the pleasure of being with you guys again, but this time I'm going to be talking about job development, which is pretty cool. I love job development. I know a lot of folks are afraid of it because, well, maybe afraid is too strong a word, but struggle with it. And that's because we're helpers by trade. We're not salespeople. We're not comfortable wearing that sales skin, right? So, but we're going to be talking about it. We'll be talking about job development. What questions might we have? Here I go. I can't talk again. Do we have any questions, Denise?
I don't see any questions right now, other than someone said they weren't able to access the Word document, so it'll be going out to all the participants today
Okay,
in the
great. And
handouts.
yeah, I'm going to send that to you as soon as, well, I'm going to pull it up and send it to you. Well, I'll send it to you right after this webinar ends, Denise. And the links are organized by slide. So people will, you already have the PDF of the PowerPoint, right, Denise?
Yes.
Okay, so people will be able to reference this links with the slide numbers.
Any questions?
Are you guys always a quiet bunch?
They are
JP has
usually
a
not
hand up.
this quiet.
Oh, I don't know what to think about that. Justin, did you have a question? Nope. Okay. If anybody has a question, just take yourself off speaker and ask away. All right. Well, if you do think of a question, because that's what happens, we think of the questions after the session has ended, if you're like me. If you think of any questions, let me put my email in chat. And you are more than welcome to send me your question directly, or I'll be happy to answer it if I can. All right. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate all of you, and I hope you all stay warm. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you, Sandra. I just want to let you guys know that we have some upcoming webinars. We will be doing Job Development 101 in March 2025. Job Corps is coming up. We'll be doing featuring Pinellas County Schools because they're starting transition in the third grade. And so we want to see how that looks for K-12. We'll be talking about Disability Employment Awareness Month in February, Working While Disabled in March. We'll be doing Working Women with Autism in April. We will also have Cody, who is a musician and he's also an entrepreneur, and he will be talking about employment challenges and strategies while performing magic tricks in April 2025. We will also be featuring recovering from a stroke with autism in April 2025, and the employment virtual conference will be held in May or June of 2025. Any questions so far? I am putting into the chat the link to the survey, or you can scan this QR code. Once you take the survey and you hit end, then you should be redirected to a page to download your certificate. Remember to input your name and print with changes or save the file with changes, otherwise it won't happen. If you happen to have pop-up blockers on, then it will not switch to the redirected page and you'll have to reach out to me and my email address to get your certificate of completion. Any questions or comments? Well, I want to thank you all for your time and attendance. And I also want to give you back 30 minutes of your day. Have a great one. Take care. And if you'd like to be a speaker, you can reach out to me. And don't forget the Florida APSI Summit is coming up in Orlando, February 19th through the 21st. And we hope to see you there. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.